Okay, good evening. This is the July 8th, 2020 meeting of the Wilmington Board of Appeals. It's now 7:05 p.m. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law under General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. Members of the public who wish to watch and to listen to the meeting may do so in the following manner: WCTV Channel 9 Comcast Xfinity, Channel 37 Verizon Fios, and live streaming at WCTV.org. This meeting of the Wilmington Board of Appeals is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. Members of the public who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may also do so via telephone by dialing 1-646-558-8656 and enter meeting ID 838-6570-7742. Attending this meeting virtually will be allowed to make comments if they wish to do so during the portion of the hearing designated for public comment by following the steps previously noted, then press *9 on their telephone keypad. This will then notify the meeting host that the caller wishes to speak. All callers using this feature will be placed in queue in the order they entered the prompt. In the event that despite our best efforts, we are not able to provide for real-time access, we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as we are able. We have a full complement of the board being present. I'm going to, in accordance with my past practice with regard to these meetings, I would like to take the quicker special permit matters first in order to assist those residents and get them heard rather than putting them behind a lengthy hearing. So what I'm going to do, if it's okay with the board, is I'm going to first call on the docket case 1320, Eckert and Ziegler Radio Pharma Incorporated, map R1, parcel 204, 25 Upton Drive, to acquire a special permit under 6.6.10.8 for use of a hazardous and/or toxic materials. Do we have someone present for the applicant?
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hugh Evans, and I'm with a representative of the company Eckert and Ziegler Radio Pharma Incorporated, the current occupant of 25 Upton Drive.
Hi, Mr. Evans. Why don't you let us know what you're seeking, Mr. Evans?
Thank you very much. We are seeking the permission to have our premises to use radioactive materials used in the production of cancer therapy and diagnostic imaging products. We are one of the largest manufacturers and world leaders in cancer therapy and diagnostic imaging, and under the terms of the regulations, we consider the radioactive component to come under the requirement for declaration of radioactive waste. I beg your pardon, not radioactive waste, but radioactivity, I beg your pardon. And for background information, we will be using very, very small quantities in the terms of milliliters, thousandths of a liter of radioactive materials. And we do not see any obvious way in which this material could get into the groundwater or aquifer. And therefore, we are asking for your consideration of granting this permit.
Can I ask you, Mr. Evans, I will read into the record that the planning board at their meeting of July 7th unanimously voted to recommend approval, and they say that safeguards appear to be in place to protect the interests of the groundwater protection district. Can you just briefly outline what those safeguards are?
Yes, certainly. Number one, before anyone in Massachusetts, or indeed the whole of the United States, is allowed to possess radioactive materials, we have to obtain a license from the Massachusetts Department of Radiation Control and Protection, the division of the Department of Health. We have an application in with them, and when that application is granted, we will be allowed to operate with radioactive materials under their supervision and license up to the stated quantities that we have applied for. Is that sufficient at this moment?
Well, I mean, you've indicated that you believe that your licensing process will grant, by virtue of being licensed, that the safeguards will be in place. But is there any way that you can just briefly outline what they are?
Yes, certainly. I have a further colleague on the line who is our certified health physicist and what is called our radiation protection officer. His name is Dr. Christopher Martell, and I'd like to introduce him to be more specific on those particular areas that are of your concern. Over to you, Chris.
Sure. So thank you. In terms of the protections we have, there's basically two things that we addressed in our programs and the commitments we've made to the state of Massachusetts. We're trying to make sure that, we have programs in place to ensure that we protect the staff that is working in the building. And the other is to make sure that we prevent any radiation or any type of exposure of the public. So in order to do that, we have a number of procedures in place and equipment that we're using to monitor for radioactivity and radiation in the building. So primarily, since the amount that we're using, the quantities are very small. It's very easy to contain in small containers, basically, small vials. And once it's received, it's brought directly to a location for receipt, where we ensure the integrity of the packaging materials. And from there, it's brought directly to our room, where we'll be handling the materials inside of what's called a hot cell. It's just like a large, totally enclosed, chemical fume hood, something like along those lines, except that it's built specifically for handling radioactive materials. So to ensure that there is no release of that material, the container is enclosed, and there's only specific ports where you can take material in or out of the box, essentially. And everything is always checked to ensure that there is nothing contaminating the outside of any container when it's removed from the box. Also, even though there's little to no likelihood of any type of airborne effluent of radioactive material, we've still taken the precaution to have HEPA filtration on the box itself, and then there's backup filtration as well. And that's basically just the general design for these types of facilities, not that it's intended as the stopgap for it because of the harm of the material that could be caused. And it's just a standard for how this material is handled. So we have procedures in place to ensure that there's not going to be any, that the handling of materials, to ensure that there's not going to be any contamination or release of the materials. We have equipment in place to ensure that everything will always be enclosed, and we have detectors and programs and procedures in place to look for possible contamination. And then we also have engineering controls in place to ensure nothing can be released to the environment. And as I said, that's primarily because that's a standard for the industry, not because the amount that we're handling certainly requires that type of control.
Understood. Thank you, sir. Do any members of the board have any questions of the applicant or comments?
I do, says Councilor Cusack. Regarding, you have not received your license yet from the Massachusetts Department of Health Radiation Control Program?
We have not at the moment. It's under consideration. And the issue that we have is that the previous occupant of the premises was a company called Dusa Pharma, and they were manufacturing normal pharmaceuticals. And before we can handle any radioactivity or to conduct our operations, we have to convert the inside of the clean room island within the 25 Upton Drive facility into a radiopharmaceutical clean room. And the difference is that the radiopharmaceutical clean room is under a depression of air pressure such that air always leaks in, whereas with pharmaceutical facilities, they are under positive pressure where the air leaks out if there is any leakage at all. And we are quite desperate at the moment to obtain the permit, which is pending the result of the meeting this evening, such that our engineering company, who is the specialist and who originally built the clean rooms in this facility 20 years ago, to modify the air handling system to convert it from positive pressure to negative pressure. And that is the main issue for us at the moment. We need to obtain the building renovation permit to enable us to exercise the conversion of the clean rooms from pharmaceutical to radiopharmaceutical. And that is the sort of catch-22 at the moment. Before we obtain our license from the Massachusetts Department of Radiation Control, and which is part of the Massachusetts Department of Health, we will be inspected by them, and our license acquisition will be dependent on their inspection of the facility. But at the moment, we're not able to proceed with the facility renovations to convert the HVAC until we get the approval from this Board of Appeals.
So you would expect us to vote on this, having that pending?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your...
Would you expect us to vote on this prior to this license being approved?
Yes, that would be the norm, as it's an established condition, and also as the licensing body considers the effect on the general public, and they will also be considering that there would be no route or methodology whereby radioactive materials could get into the sanitary system or into the aquifer, because we are using such minute quantities of liquid within the facility, typically milliliters per operation.
So Dan, my concern is I don't consider granting something that doesn't have a license as a condition. As long as you get your license, you're good to go. I mean, I don't think that would be considered a condition, would it?
I think you could make it conditional, because if they don't get their license, it's a moot point. If they don't get their license, they're not going to be able to handle the material. So, I mean, I personally have no problem granting it. You know, it's obviously going to be conditional of them getting their license, because if they can't get the license, it's a moot issue.
Yeah, it just seems a cart before the horse, in my opinion.
Exactly. You took the words out of my mouth.
Well, we've been in touch with the building inspector, and we've created. We've asked what the rules of the game were in this, and he made it quite clear that we would not be able to proceed with the renovations. In other words, getting the building permit until the Board of Appeals had come to a decision, and we were sincerely hoping that it was a possibility that the Board of Appeals would approve. That would enable us to get on with that, because the extra urgency here is that one of our major potential customers it operates a facility also on Upton Drive, just across the road from us, and they already have a radioactive materials facility, and our main aim is to be able to supply them with the feedstock. That company name is Certex. They're in 16 Upton Drive. We are in 25 Upton Drive, and they are experiencing quite a problem at the moment because their long-established supplier from Massachusetts has exited the business, and they have been basically begging us to get up and running as soon as we can to be able to supply them. Otherwise, there could be a drug shortage, which could affect their ability to supply product that is used in the treatment of liver cancer. So while I accept it sounds like it's a catch-22 and the cart before the horse, we wish to be able to obtain a positive decision from the Board of Appeals this evening, if possible, such that we can commence our refurbishment, because the building inspector from Wilmington has presently told us that we cannot do anything until the Board of Appeals has ruled. And then there's going to be at least a month plus of internal renovations to the clean room facility, mainly on the air supply, and converting, as I mentioned, from a positive air supply to a negative air supply.
Is it possible that the licensing board could ask you to do a re-renovation of something within that building that we previously approved?
No, because the facility for handling radioactive materials operates under the complete opposite to that operating for normal pharmaceutical drug manufacturing. If they came to inspect, we would not be able to prove what is the established technology in this industry, where for handling radiopharmaceuticals, you have to operate with air into the boxes and with very efficient filtration.
Any other members of the board wish to be heard or have any questions of the applicant?
I don't have any issue with the application or with what they're asking for. I think it's very reasonable. I just only have two questions. And first question is there any special precautions that the fire department needs to know about? And has this been run by the fire department? That was the first question. And the second question I have is when this gets granted, I noticed on the documents that you have, it lists, you know, how many gallons of chemicals you're going to use and stuff like that. If this is granted, is there some type of a limit on the amount of radioactive material that can be stored on site, or is it stated in there someplace and I just didn't see it?
Yes, we can answer both those. Could I invite Chris Martell, our radiation safety officer, to respond to both those questions on the fire department and on the activity quantity that we're allowed to use?
Yes. Well, the first thing I'd like to say just about the cart before the horse issue is that typically, I mean, I've been doing this for over 30 years in Massachusetts, and typically the radiation control program wants to see the equipment in place before they issue the license. So that's one of the driving factors for trying to get this through now. In terms of the fire department, the proper postings will be up in the facility for all the egress points and the entry, and wherever radioactive material possession signage is required, that will be up. And typically what I do is actually go through it with a member of the fire department and go over the signage with them. And because of the other business in town, Certex, is dealing with the exact same radioactive material, they should be fairly familiar with it already. And with respect to the limit, yes, there is a limit that we cannot go above in that facility at any one time. So that is a very strict limit, and that's one of the things that we need to keep close eye on. And one thing I'd like to say about that, the radioactive material is called yttrium-90, and it has a 64-hour half-life. So if you're familiar with half-life, essentially that means that we have half the amount of radioactive material that we started with every 64 hours. So after 640 hours, essentially, we have no more radioactive material. So processing the material quickly and getting it out the door over to Certex is going to be paramount to make sure that we can give them the product stock that they're going to need. So the half-life is an important issue here. So hopefully I've answered your questions, Tony.
Can I just interject for a second? Just to answer, to add to what Chris already said, we have contacted the Wilmington Fire Department. I have exchanged multiple emails with Chief Deputy Pozzi. He would like to inspect the site after the construction is finished. So basically, again, it's that circle.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Chairman, I have a question for them. So you talk about this other Certex company across the street. So are you saying that you're transporting radioactive material from your site to their site? And
yes, that is absolutely correct. And we will be in compliance with all the regulations and standard practice procedures required for the transportation of radioactive materials by road. We are world experts. We are shipping radioactive material from our manufacturing site in Germany to Certex at this moment in time, and it's a well-established procedure in compliance with national and international laws, and this is not an issue.
So another question, are you saying that after 64.5 shelf life, whatever the life is, it's not radioactive anymore?
That's correct. So it actually changes from one material, one isotope to another. It changes from yttrium-90 to zirconium-90. The yttrium-90 is radioactive, and the zirconium-90 is not. It's just like regular zirconium. And it's a 64-hour half-life. So every 64 hours, you have half of what you had before. So then it's called decay, and it decays away very quickly.
So there's no waste of, it's like, what do you, so say that it's not radioactive, but then is there like a waste of that could still be harmful, and what do you do with it?
That's a good question. That's a great question about the waste, because after we hold anything that might be contaminated with the yttrium-90, which there really shouldn't be because it's all contained. But if there is, then we will hold that material for greater than 1 month. So there will be nothing left that's radioactive after that period of time. And we still have to, as per state regulation, we're allowed to hold material. It's called storage for decay. And when we considered that it's all essentially gone, now we have to subject it to testing with very sensitive radiation detectors, and they're documenting zeros is a very important activity. So we have to follow that process before we can get rid of anything that may have been contaminated, whether that's gloves, glass, paper, plastic, anything that might be contaminated. We have to hold it and then check it after that period of time, and then we can get rid of it. And we document everything that gets disposed of.
So even your like daily trash?
Yeah, well, we have things are anything that could be in that contamination area would be called a controlled area. And any trash that's generated inside a controlled area, whether it's water, from washing anything, paper, plastic, gloves, that will be held for a minimum of 640 hours and then subjected to testing afterwards. Anything outside of the controlled area, like the office area, things like that, can be disposed of without any controls, because it cannot be radioactive. And anything that passes the barrier, including people, from the controlled area to the uncontrolled area, has to be checked with sensitive equipment to make sure there's no radioactive contamination present that's leaving the area. So it's all pretty standard processes, and this material is also very easy to detect, which is a nice feature of it. So if there's anything there, I mean, we're detecting things down to the atom level. So if it's there, we'll see it and we'll hold on to it.
So another two more questions is how much, you said waste, you're going to hold on to it for so many hours. Like, how much could possibly be at the end of the day in your building? Like
waste, you mean?
Yeah, waste and radioactive. Are we talking about gallons? Or are we talking like how much are you going to have?
Yeah, it's going to be far less than that. It's all one of the things we also have to comply with for the state is we have to give them a waste minimization plan. So all of our procedures have to be written and our practices such that we minimize the generation of radioactive waste. And so we're talking about, much less than a gallon of waste. And that's including solid. So it's not a gallon of liquid waste by any means. Liquid waste will be milliliters, if that. So if you just think of like a 5-gallon pail as the volume that could be held in that, we could probably work with a 5-gallon pail for a month and still not fill it up with radioactive waste.
And do you have any other buildings that you are part of in Massachusetts?
You mean Eckert Ziegler?
Yes. Like, is there yes. So your company, or are you affiliated with another company that has this similar building and radioactive and the same thing that you're doing here, that you want to do here in Wilmington and somewhere else in Massachusetts?
Yeah, Hugh, do you want to take that one?
Yes, not in Massachusetts, Ms. Santini. We have an existing license from the USNRC, U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Massachusetts Department of Radiation Health Radiation Control Program to import and distribute radioactive materials, and we have been inspected and we operate that. We typically are importing from a manufacturing site that we own in Germany. It comes in by passenger flight or by cargo flight, and it is distributed to our customers within Massachusetts on a regular basis. And at this moment in time, we have been somewhat embarrassed with the COVID situation, where we've suffered some delays on supplying our existing customer Certex at 16 Upton Drive, and that has necessarily expedited our program to create our own manufacturing dispensing system here in Massachusetts, rather than importing the material from Germany per se. So there are several issues going on here. There isn't another facility that we are involved with in Massachusetts for the manufacture and distribution, but we do hold at this present time a license for the importation and distribution of the radioactive material that we've had for 10 years. We operated an office out of Hopkinton in Massachusetts, and we have recently obtained a transfer of that license just for the importation and distribution, not for actually the handling. And we have transferred that in anticipation to 25 Upton Drive.
So, so you might not have it in Massachusetts. Are you doing this in any other state?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit. Could you repeat?
Are you doing it? Do you have a building in any other state?
Oh yes, we have buildings in Atlanta, in Georgia. We have buildings in California, in Valencia, and in Burbank. Eckert & Ziegler, as a worldwide company, is one of the world leaders in producing and distributing radioactive materials for medical and for industrial applications. But the facility that we are preparing, or would wish to prepare in Massachusetts, in 25 Upton Drive, will be specifically for the preparation of radioactive drug materials.
I mean, it's very important, this facility, because I actually was the director of physics for Brigham and Women's Hospital for a while, which was a large user of this actual product. And it's critical to the cancer therapy world. And unlike drugs, this material has a very short shelf life, if you will, meaning that from the point of manufacture across the street to delivery into the patient, it has to be within days to have any efficacy for that patient. So it's having this on the East Coast is going to be a huge benefit to all liver cancer patients throughout the Eastern area.
Okay, I'm going to open up the public hearing at this point. I just want to make sure that there's anybody that wishes to be heard from the public, they get that opportunity. Mr. O'Neill, is there anybody that's in queue that wishes to be heard that you can see?
We do have a caller. We don't have anyone indicating they wish to speak. For those callers on the line, you can hit *9 on your keypad to indicate that you wish to speak.
Why don't we just hold off for a moment and allow anyone that may want to take advantage of that to do so.
Mr. Chairman, could I
Yes.
ask a couple questions?
Ray, we'll come. Hold on, Ray. We're going to come back.
Okay.
I just wanted to get the public an opportunity to be heard on it if they want to. We'll come back and we'll still have some opportunity.
Thank you.
I just didn't want to. I didn't want to forget that.
We have no callers, Mr. Chair.
Okay, going once, going twice, and then I'll close the public hearing. Now, Mr. Lepore, you had a couple questions or comments you wanted to make?
Yes. So basically, if I'm understanding this, is this facility basically being used as a like a testing lab?
Mr. Lepore, it's not really a testing lab. It is a dedicated, designed facility for handling the production of a radioactive component that is used in the treatment of liver cancer. And it just so happens that our largest single customer is quite literally across the street from us in 16 Upton Drive, and we're in 25. If that doesn't fully answer your question, please ask further.
No, the other thing is, I was just wondering, I don't know if town council has to weigh in on this, maybe the chairman can give me a little insight. Would the town be required to have this facility basically post a bond because of the high content of this as far as, health issue, or would they have to post a insurance policy to the town of Wilmington in case a crisis did, for some reason, even cause concern to even fire personnel and someone get injured? Would Wilmington have to be on any of these policies or bond presented to the town of Wilmington?
Mr. Lepore, that is a great question, and I would like to ask my colleague, Dr. Chris Martell, to respond, as we necessarily have to have such protections in place.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. There's a financial surety bond that has to be filed whenever you obtain a license with the state of Massachusetts, and it really relates to the types of radioactive material you're going to have on site and the quantity. So the importance there is some radioactive materials can be very long-lived. I mean, thousands of years. And then in that instance, yes, financial surety is absolutely required by the state of Massachusetts. It's typically, there's different levels, but typically like a $5 million surety bond that has to be created. And you have to have that before they'll even give you the license. And then for other radioactive materials with a shorter half-life, then the issue becomes much less of a concern, because what they're concerned about is if let's say, for example, it's a startup company and it goes belly up, and then you're stuck with this facility that could be contaminated with a long-lived radioactive material. And that's what the surety bond is there for, to make sure that the taxpayers of Massachusetts don't end up footing the bill. However, with shorter-lived materials, then the possibility of that essentially is eliminated, because then you just, essentially close the door for a month and it's all gone when you come back. So that's kind of one of the beautiful things about short-lived radioactive material. So for this facility, I do not believe a financial surety bond will be required. I'll have to check on that. Usually it's the lawyers that get involved in that. But I would be surprised if we have to have anything beyond the typical insurance policy required of a manufacturing facility.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Ray?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my little bit of concern is a couple of things. Obviously, a neighbor, if you did have a crisis, what would be like? Obviously, if they breathe it in or inhaled in, what kind of a symptom would they show, and how long would that come out to see basically that there has been a problem with the person as far as their health?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. What you really have to look at is, the source term. Is it possible for the material to get into a state and be delivered to a nearby resident? And for the material that we're using, it's an aqueous material, so it's not going to volatilize as it would with, say, some other things, like if you're familiar with alcohol, things like that, isopropyl alcohol, that evaporates very quickly. So that moves into the air. For the material we're using, it does not. It's aqueous. So it does not evolve or does not volatilize. So from a source term standpoint, it's almost, I won't say impossible, but infinitesimal in terms of risk to individuals. So if it were to get into the air, if you were in the facility and in the room and something really, I don't even know what could happen where it could actually occur. But let's just say, for the example of our discussion, you were able to inhale some of the yttrium-90. Since we inject this into people, that's one thing. We inject it to fight cancer. One thing about radioactive materials is it also increases the chances that you could develop cancer over time. And the amount of material that it would take to increase that risk, even appreciably to some extent, would be a lot of material, more than we would be able to release into a room. So I don't see that from source term standpoint, can't really get it into the air. If for some weird thing that happened, it was in the air and someone inhaled it, it's the risk is the increased probability of developing cancer over a 20, 30, 40-year period. There's nothing immediate. It's not like inhaling a toxic material. It's a radioactive element. I mean, you probably are already inhaling more radioactive material in your own homes because of the radon that's present. And that's a totally different type of radioactive material, and it's something that is more hazardous than what we're dealing with. So the yttrium-90 is not that much of a dose-causing material in the quantities that we're trying to deal with that could get into the air. So hopefully that answers your questions. That's a great question. You get into some really technical things, and it's hard to get into it without really starting to go into math too much.
You have anything further, Ray?
No, I'm good with it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I got to tell you, if these folks have a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to ship this stuff over from Germany, then I'm not too concerned about them shipping it across the street. If they don't get their local license or their state license, then whatever we grant them today is moot. I mean, it's for cancer treatment. They're already having some delays and problems because of coronavirus. I have no problem with granting this special permit, if conditional upon obviously obtaining any type of proper state licenses. But that's just me.
Can I ask you a question? So I'm just looking at your list of, so did any of the butters actually reach out to you or respond or?
No, they have not, Ms. Santini. And we believe that because there is another entity that uses radioactive material in our immediate neighborhood, we are in a friendly area, shall we say.
Or glowing.
No, you're not gonna glow.
No, we avoid that.
Everybody watches Chernobyl movie. It's nothing like that. I spent the last 16 years at Boston Medical Center, and this is really minuscule amount of radioactivity and radioactive material. You won't have the barrels with radioactive material somewhere there. No, it doesn't work like that.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a motion?
Understand the concern. So yeah.
Yeah, Chairman.
Hold on, everybody. We have a member who wants to make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to grant special permit for case 1320 to acquire a special permit in accordance with 6.6.10.8 for use of a hazardous and/or toxic materials.
Okay, do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Lepore. We're going to now go through a roll call vote. We'll start off with
Mr. Chairman. Did he put a condition on that?
No.
No, he did not.
So shouldn't there be a condition with them getting the license?
If it makes you feel better, I guess you could put a condition on it. But unless they get the license to handle the materials from the state, then they're not going to be able to take advantage of any special permit that we give them here to do so. Mr. Barletta, if you wish to amend your motion to include that condition to make Ms. Santini feel a little bit better about it, and then you have the right to do so. If you don't want to, you have a motion that's been seconded. I really shouldn't have even entertained you, Ms. Santini, because there was a motion that was properly seconded. But since we're trying to get this together for all the members, I'll grant that. I'll grant that collegiality. Mr. Barletta, do you wish to amend your motion?
I'm fine with it as submitted.
Okay, so we have a motion that's been seconded by Mr. Lepore. We'll start off Ms. Santini, yay or nay?
Yay.
Mr. Veerman, yay. Mr. Siracusa?
No.
No. Mr. Barletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Lepore?
Yes.
It passes 4-1. Thank you, folks. Good luck. I hope you develop some treatments that can help a lot of people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and greatly appreciate your time.
All righty, have a good night. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, the next matter on the docket, I'm going to take it again before the comp permit, is case 1420. Ms. Ruth Gronemeyer, map 31, parcel 1A, 12 Shawshene Avenue, and she's seeking to acquire a special permit under 6.2 for the floodplain district. Do we have Ms. Gronemeyer present?
Yes,
Ma'am, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
yes.
Okay. Why don't you let the board know what you're seeking?
Could I let David go for me?
Sure.
He's right here.
Okay, David, I just see you showing up as David. Can you give us your last name for the record?
He's muted.
Oh, okay. If Mr. O'Neill, if you can unmute David, he's waving.
Yeah, I've been pressing the unmute button. I'm not sure why.
Here he goes. He's
There we go.
unmuted.
I think that's it now. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
David, what's your last name?
Yes, my name is David Giangrande. I'm a principal at Design Consultants in Somerville, Mass. And I'm representing Ruth Gronemeyer, who currently resides at 10 Shawshene Ave. And she's looking to develop a single-family dwelling or construct a single-family dwelling on a legally conforming buildable lot behind 10 Shawshene Ave. So tonight we're here before you seeking a special permit under section 6.2 for work within a floodplain district. I would note that we have been before the Conservation Commission and filed a notice of intent back in September of 2019. And we received an order of conditions on January 10th of 2020, which is recorded at the Registry of Deeds. The reason why we are here specifically is that the flood elevation is at 95.5, and she wishes to build a dwelling and will have to do some filling of that floodplain. The total fill of the floodplain is 5,241 cubic feet. And then we will create a compensatory storage area on her site for 5,998 cubic feet. As I had mentioned, it has gone before the Conservation Commission already, and there will be an increase in floodplain storage of around 14%. I'm available for any questions if the board wishes.
So you already have your order of conditions.
That is correct.
Okay, just before I forget, I'll read into the record the planning board's recommendation at their meeting on July 7th, 2020. Upon motion duly made and seconded, it was unanimously voted to recommend approval. The proposal appears to meet the requirements of section 6.2.6 of the zoning bylaw. That's the planning board. Any members wish to have any questions of the applicant or any comments on the application?
So can I ask a question? So you're basically saying that you're gonna fill in the flood area to raise it up to build a house on it.
That's correct. And then on the higher part of Mrs. Gronemeyer's lot, we cut out an area and lower that area to compensate.
In the same equal parts?
At the same elevations, yes. We do an incremental and elevation study. So for each incremental foot, we have to, if we're gonna fill a certain area, then we have to compensate it at the same elevation. So it absolutely equals out.
Anybody else have any questions from the board?
This has gone through the Conservation Commission?
Yes, sir.
They got their order of conditions.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm going to open up the public hearing. Mr. O'Neill, is there anyone in queue wishing to be heard on this particular application?
We currently do not have any callers participating in this meeting.
There's no one online at all.
That's correct.
All right, I'll wait a moment about the time that it would take for somebody to dial in.
Text him now. He just watched it on television. He was reading in the car.
Okay, I will, seeing that, and I'll just ask the applicant. The applicants had no feedback from anybody in the neighborhood, have they?
No.
Okay. All right, so I'll close the public hearing on this matter. I'll bring it back to the board in case any members have any additional questions or comments, or if in case anyone wishes to make a motion.
Well, actually, can we go back? So my question, where are the drawings to the house? Do we not get to see those?
The actual architectural drawings?
Yeah, of the house.
Yeah, we don't have architectural drawings. This is only related, the request is related to the floodplain. So it's a volume, just really simply a volumetric computation.
Okay.
Anyone else wish to make any comment, question, or submit a motion?
So this is Tom Siracusa. So you're saying that the proposed work shouldn't be reviewed by us? Is that what you're saying?
Is that what I'm saying? No, not at all. We're here before you with a site plan that has been submitted for the compensatory storage and the fill computations.
Yeah, Tom, they're not requesting a special permit to build per se. They're only before us under the 6.2 for the floodplain. That's the only thing we're handling tonight.
There's no dimensional relief required. Just the floodplain.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Chairman, I'll make a motion.
You have a motion by Mr. Barletta. What's your motion, Mr. Barletta?
Make a motion to, for case 1420, 12 Shawshene Avenue, to grant a special permit in accordance with 6.2 for the floodplain district.
Okay, do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Lepore. We'll go down a roll call. Ms. Santini.
Yeah, sure.
Aye. Okay. And then I will vote aye. Mr. Siracusa.
Aye.
Mr. Barletta.
Yes.
And then Mr. Lepore.
Aye.
It's been unanimously approved. Good luck, folks. Take care.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now, the last remaining matter on the docket tonight is the continued case 920, Princeton Development LLC, map 89, parcels 8, 9, 10, 13A, and 13B, Middlesex Avenue and Jefferson Road. It's continued from our June 24th meeting, and it's to acquire a comprehensive permit under Mass General Law, Chapter 40B. And let me see who we have here. We have Andrew.
Just so everyone,
I am here, Mr. Chairman.
Hold on.
everyone does have the ability to unmute themselves again.
Okay, so we have Andrew, you're here?
I am here, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, now why don't you get us up to speed? We didn't conduct any real business related to this at the last meeting, so why don't you let us know what you plan on doing tonight and what the board members can expect to hear. I will say that we did receive later this afternoon, and to be frank with you, not enough time for me to really read them, a number of different emails regarding the project. And then specifically, just so you know what we're seeing, I got a July 8th, 2020 letter from Green International Affiliates. I got a July 8th, 2020 letter from Mr. Jeffrey Brown from Princeton. And I got a July 8th, 2020 letter from Hancock. And that was roughly around 3 o'clock they were sent. I didn't get them until I looked around 6. So the board members, if indeed they've all received them, they may need some time to digest them, but why don't you let us know where we stand on the project tonight and what you want to go over tonight.
Be happy to, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. For the record, Andrew Chapin with Princeton Properties. My colleagues Dan Endyke and Jeff Brown with me. Joe Pesnola from Hancock Associates and Jeffrey Dirk, the traffic engineer from Vaness. We're all on this evening. Mr. Chairman, since our last meeting, we have received a letter from town staff outlining all of their remaining concerns. That letter has been responded to, and that's one that you have already received in your packet. We received the civil engineering peer review, and there's been a back and forth between BSC and Hancock in I think a very collegial manner, and I think you'll hear that this evening. And then we will have the traffic wrap up between Jeff Dirk and the folks from Green International, who are your traffic peer review consultant. So,
okay, what do you want to take up first?
Well, I think we're going to do the staff memo first. We're going to go through the staff memo. I'm going to turn it over to Joe Pesnola. He's going to walk you through that. He'll share the screen and pull up the letters so that all the members can follow along. Joe will highlight the issue and the response. I think you'll find that it's quite a bit of good information in there. Town should be awfully proud, specifically of both Ms. Gingrich and the town engineer who have done yeoman's work in the last 2 weeks. And I think you'll see, especially with respect to the issue of the wall on Middlesex Street is now gone, and the slopes into the garage have been to a great extent removed. Much of that credit goes to the town engineer and Ms. Gingrich working with Joe Pesnola. So there's a lot to be proud of, I think, in the last 2 weeks. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We did receive a town staff letter dated July 6th, and there were several comments, and I'll try to be brief, but also detailed. Item number 1 had to do with the proposed subdivision. As you remember, we are, as part of this process, also creating the lot from several parcels and formalizing, or I guess writing some of the past with regards to the creation of Jefferson Road, making sure that that's right and ready. And the question, the first comment had to do with how the road was going to be improved in compliance with the subdivision regulations. And we are going to put all new pavement down 4 inches thick in accordance with the subdivision rules and regulations, with a brand new 12-inch binder or base course of gravel. We're going to do a concrete sidewalk on one side. We're going to fix the crosswalks and accessible routes and ramps at Jefferson and Middlesex. Our primary goal is to get our residents over to the south side of the road in a brand new sidewalk down there that's adjacent to the commuter lot, to get both the residents from building A and building B to the commuter lot, as well as from the office building, and it'll be a marked improvement. The items that we are not complying with are due to the fact that we have a 40-foot right-of-way and not a 50-foot right-of-way. And that would be a reduction in the pavement width that's required under the subdivision regulations of 28 feet down to 24 feet, and the requirement for there to be sidewalks on both sides. Additionally, a constraint is as Jefferson crosses over out into the back where building B is being proposed, There are 2 existing retaining walls with wetlands on both sides, and we are working with those retaining walls so as not to increase or so as not to impact any wetlands. All other requirements are complied with. We have provided within this response an update to our title sheet, which has the waivers, and it itemizes the waivers from the subdivision rules and regulations. Comment 2 had to do with, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. That was comment 2. Go back to comment 1. I apologize. Comment 1 had to do with the submission requirements of a definitive subdivision. Your board is acting in the place of the planning board, not only taking up the comprehensive permit, and that's kind of normal, but also the subdivision, and you will ultimately have to endorse a plan in the place of the planning board that gets recorded at the registry of deeds that creates the lots. What we're asking, and what is normal in these type of 40Bs that also have subdivision, is that we present a preliminary subdivision plan, which we have. We've also presented a plethora of technical information with regards to what we are proposing, and some of those are the ones that I just outlined with regards to construction standards. But what we would ask is that the formal submission of the recordable definitive subdivision plan for the endorsement of the ZBA be a condition of the comprehensive permit. And again, that's standard practice. It's envisioned in the regulations, which only call for preliminary subdivision. That be done prior to a building permit. We present the plan. You have staff review that as they would review a plan being submitted, a definitive plan being submitted to planning board, and they give you the high sign to endorse it so that it could then be recorded and used for the transfer of the property. Item number 3 has to do with this lot configuration and the preliminary subdivision plan. One of the lots out there currently, in its current form, has the underlying landowner's office building on it at 200 Jefferson. That's a very large lot that goes all the way out back, and we are taking the back parking lot and the undeveloped portion of that lot and bringing it into the this 40B development lot, the 23 acres that we've talked about. There was a call in a previous memorandum, and it was kind of it was expanded upon here with regards to demonstrating that we're leaving that office building compliant with zoning. So we provided some zoning information and alluded to the fact that that lot will be compliant. The nuance here is to make that lot compliant, there will have to be an additional 17 parking spaces added. Currently, that lot lot from a zoning standpoint enjoys the parking lot that's proximate to the office building, but it also enjoys that back parking lot that no one ever uses, or some truckers occasionally park there and use it for storage of their personal vehicles when they're out on their rigs, and then their rigs when they come back. But it's never used for the office building. We've been out there many times to see that, but nonetheless, the requirement under zoning is that office building have 58 spaces, and it only has proximate to the building 39 spaces. So what we are saying is yes, we would need to take that expansion of parking to the planning board under site plan review, because it can't be enveloped into this process because it's not an affordable housing project. And that we would make that, we would ask the board that that be condition of approval, because it's a two-step process. We need a project first. We need to have a project. We need a comprehensive permit. Then that lot needs to make sure that it maintains its zoning compliance. So we go to planning board and get the additional parking spaces approved. And that comes precursor to what I just talked about in the definitive subdivision plan for endorsement. So now your board knows that the planning board has acted on that, so that you are not creating a subdivision that creates zoning problems. And that three-step process: permit, site plan review, of planning board for this lot too, and then the definitive subdivision is the sequencing that we would ask the board to entertain in that manner.
What if the planning board doesn't give the relief sought?
It's site plan review primarily. There is one waiver that is required for the reconfiguration of the lot, and that is front setback to parking. The lot is non-compliant. It's been there for a long time. But in direct answer to your question, if the board if it granted site plan review but didn't grant that waiver, and that waiver is within their purview for commercial lots, for the landscape or parking setback requirements. If they didn't grant that, then the John Sons Realty Trust, the owner of the property, also owns the vacant parcel next to the commuter lot, between the commuter lot and the railroad. Their hope is to develop that lot. They would have to develop that lot in a manner that added the parking over there. So there is a I guess a backup plan,
a fallback. Gotcha.
A fallback. So
okay,
and that would not require any waivers.
Okay,
but yeah. So item number 4 has to do with making sure, we talked about this a little bit there, on the assessor's map. It shows Jefferson going way out back, a paper portion of Jefferson, formerly known as Truman Ave, when it was subdivided back in the 50s. And we have provided through Princeton Council our legal position that we discussed with your council and with Valerie with regards to why we feel that back portion of the former Truman Ave can be extinguished and become part of the development lot. So if the board wants to dive into that, Jeffrey Brown, Princeton's council's here, but otherwise I would suggest that memorandum that he submitted is reviewed by Attorney Silverstein, and Jonathan gets back to your board that that's it. But Jonathan was involved in those discussions, and I think we're all on the same page.
Joe, it's Andrew. Joe, it's Andrew. Let me just jump in there quickly, Mr. Chairman. Just so you're aware as well, Fidelity National Title has provided affirmative coverage over that opinion, so that should make the chair happy.
Okay. The bottom line is, when you endorse that subdivision plan, that is the vehicle at which of which extinguishes that section of the road, the paper street. The next items 5 and 6 go back to talking about the definitive subdivision and some of the details and some of the normal information that's provided above and beyond what we've provided in the plan sets that have been reviewed to date. And we would ask under those 2 items that again be part of that condition that requires the formal submission to the board for review and endorsement. Item number 7 has to do with a wall located along Middlesex Ave in the plans. And this is the subject of a series of different comments here, and we have to give great credit to the town engineer, Paul Looney, who came up with an idea, or or proposed an idea to us to implement a different stormwater approach, and that would be porous pavement. We thought that if we used porous pavement, some of the grades that we were trying to attain on site, and the increase in grades that we needed to attain on site could be lowered, which would help with that wall and help with some of the steep grades. Well, that was a great suggestion. We studied it. We know we can make it work. We within your this response letter, there is an exhibit that shows the results of that, and it is a significant reduction in those elevations to eliminate the wall in front of Middlesex Ave, between the parking lot and Middlesex Ave. So that was I think a great positive step in making this a better project. The next had to do with back to Jefferson and the sidewalk. And I think this was a leftover comment because we had addressed that. The town engineer had requested that we put the concrete sidewalk right up against the curb, and that we put the grass strip against the right-of-way line. So we had done that in the past, or the prior to the plan. The item number 9 has to do with a turning radius for trash trucks, in particular to building B, and we have now provided that within this response to address sure that we can get trash truck to the dumpster in the back. Item number 10 goes back to the this is where the town engineer had actually made the suggestion to go to porous, talking about the walls, the wall in front of Middlesex and the steep grades that we had on coming off of Middlesex into the parking lot for Building A, and coming off of Jefferson into the parking lot for Building A. And again, we've committed to implement the porous pavement to lower the grades, to eliminate the wall, to reduce the slope of those entries from 10% to 5%, which is significant, and address all of items 10A and 10B in that. The item 11 has to do with emergency access within the building. And I think there's just some confusion as to the egress points for people from the lower level garage. And there are 2 stairwells in the garage, or in the building, that go down to the garage and also provide for that egress. Item number 12 is a potential conflict with the turning radius back at Building B with a fire truck. We've revised that maneuvering diagram, and it's included in this response. We had prior revised that maneuvering exhibit at the begging of the fire chief, making sure that we used his largest truck. And there was, I guess, still a little corner that we were nipping, and we've revised that and made it right and ready, proving that we can do that. We can get where we need to be. And then there was just some confusion into getting all the way in the back on the left-hand side of Building B. And the idea there is that the fire truck can pull in there if they need to address from that location. And under the state fire access regulations, the fire trucks are allowed to back up to 150 feet. Here, they're not having to back up hardly at all. It's almost like they're doing a 3-point turn on that left-hand side aisle of Building B. So that's what we are proposing. That's within the the access code regulations. and we've clarified that on the maneuvering sketch. The next item 14 has to do with architecture, and the applicant, the comment is the applicant should consider limiting or eliminating vertical elements of the building design that emphasize the height. And I'm just going to read this because it's from the project architect. The buildings are relatively long, so a balance between the vertical and horizontal elements is needed for a pleasant composition. This has been achieved with the current elevations. When the balance tips in one direction, either horizontally or vertically, the overall composition suffers. One item we will further consider in extending the horizontal extending the horizontal trim at each deck across the mechanical closets to the corner board. This will make the deck tower appear a little wider and match the small roofs at the top. And this would occur at the single wide decks only. So I think the architect understands the comment, is very cognizant of that balance between the vertical and horizontal elements, but has taken the suggestion and has some ideas to make it even better. 15 and 16 had to do with the landscaping, and I think this is a holdover from a prior comment. And we had in the last revision, there was a call to show the quantities and types of plant materials, and we had done that. We had submitted that for review. That also included some very detailed information on the proposed restoration areas along Lubbers Brook, just to the north of the existing parking lot. So that all had been submitted and is still there. The next item 17 had to do with the proposed lighting. I think there's concurrence with staff that the light styles that we've proposed are appropriate for the interior parking areas. And they're calling for a pedestrian scale lantern lighting fixture to be considered along the sidewalks. We had provided a cut sheet of something that we had done some research for, similar to some other places in town that a light fixture had been used, and would be happy to incorporate that lighting fixture into the final plans. We would ask that the final lighting plan be part of the condition that requires those final very specific details, lighting details. The next group of items has to do with utilities and drainage. There's 18 and 19 talk about the existing condition of the culvert under Jefferson. And what we'd commit to is, as a condition of approval, would ask the board to consider a full investigation. If we got to put cameras down it, we'll put cameras down it, and we'll commit to replace it if it's in disrepair. What we want to end with on Jefferson is a good roadway for our residents and for the public that will be using it, a commuter lot or the office building. So we want to make all that right and ready, but we feel that that's a detail that can be appropriately conditioned and taken care of as we're putting together the post comprehensive permit final plans, which is very normal. The next item had to do with infrastructure and showing all water, all utilities and pipe sizes and pipe materials. And we had already done that. That is currently on the plans that were submitted 2 or 3 weeks ago. The 21 has to do with a potential conflict between sewer and water, and that's appropriate again for final plans to work out all of that very, very detailed construction level information. The 22 has to do with cutting and capping water mains back at the main if we are going to, and we are going to abandon the existing water services to the existing structures on Middlesex. And we had added a note to that effect and commit that we're going to do everything in accordance with the water department's rules and regulations. 23, adding some gate valves. Again, happy to do that, and would incorporate that on final plans. 24, the last item within the town comments, had to do with connecting some of our drainage system to what is or what will be the town drainage system in the intersection of Middlesex. And we've gone back and forth with Paul on that. Although all that water from the existing parking lots goes out into Middlesex now and into the town drainage system, Paul has some obligations to the what's known as the MS4, which is, you know, the state watching him on how he controls what goes into his drainage systems, and in general, he just doesn't want cross connections between private systems and his public drainage system. Well, that was going to be trouble for us until the concept of porous pavement came up, and the implementation of porous pavement is going to eliminate this connection and solve the problem. So this is a positive unintended consequence of Paul's great idea to use porous pavement. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to take a break and see if there's any questions from the board members on the staff comments that I just went through.
Sure. The next section. I think that's probably appropriate. You know, I've been reading along as you're going, so I think I have a pretty good handle on it. Do any of the board members wish to have any questions directed towards the first portion of this document that we've been going over the last half hour or so?
I'll jump in. So, Chairman, a couple questions that I have from security lights. We talked about the lights being changed for pedestrians. Is there going to be any type of like a light for security that if I know there's like usually like a blue light, you know what I'm talking about, that if anybody's feels unsecure, they can do that and then it will go right to the station? Or
we haven't planned it, but that's a great idea. Certainly we can work with the police department to do that. I think it would make sense to have one in the area, given the commuter lot and these residents in here. So we'll certainly be happy to look into that. Okay,
that's good. When you talk about there's the culvert and there's like a bar of probably whether or not you're going to put a camera down there or some kind of inspection, there's going to be like a set bar of whether or not you like what you see, or like how are you determining what's the level that you're going to be like, yeah, this is, you know, not any good, we need to put a new one in, or like how are you determining the level of condition where you judge that you need to do something all new?
Great question. It'll be our professional judgment, but everything that we're doing and all the information that we're gathering and those final plans will be put before the town engineer and public works, and ultimately, you know, they'll help with that decision as to whether or not the pipe needs to be taken up. And understand that we're going to have the whole road taken up, and what we don't want in the future is for that pipe to collapse and have a sinkhole in the road and that's just a mess. So we want it to be right. That wouldn't be a good place to save a couple bucks. So we're going to err on the side of caution there with regards to what we find. Understand the proposal at this point, as far as the public works and town engineer are concerned, is to make Jefferson Road public to the second entrance into the commuter lot. From there back, it'll be private, and it'll be the responsibility of Princeton to maintain it, to plow it, to repair it, to do whatever they need to do to it. So that culvert is in that private section. So although the public works will be integral in reviewing the state and the plan to replace it or not replace it, ultimately it will be a part of the private road. So again, Princeton's not going to want to try to save a buck there. They want the long-term viability, structural integrity of that infrastructure.
That's all I got.
Anybody else have any questions so far? Okay, Joseph, you want to move forward?
Sure. So let's do the second letter on the civil engineering peer review.
Sure. Comment regarding the dumpsters for building B appear to be difficult to access. We did within this response provide a maneuvering plan, and we did actually rotated the dumpster a little bit so that it addresses the truck properly. Whether the truck's going to be a front pick, come in and pick up and then back out, or it's going to back up. That little rotation, that little tweak is helpful. The next item is now you'll see that we've got item 3 and then item 6. We've omitted these follow the original BSC letter. The items that were omitted were already addressed. So if you go back to the BSC letter from July 6th, you'll see that, item 1, 2, 4, and 5 say no further action is required, and it was properly addressed. The next just has to do with the fire chief and making sure that everything that we have changed on the plans is okay with the fire chief. And it's our understanding that the staff have been continually getting together, including the fire chief, planner, town engineer, and those reviews are representative of all of that culmination of the discussions with staff. The next item had to do with snow storage. Snow storage on this we've brought this up a couple times, and we know that it's an issue, and the biggest issue is we've got sensitive wetlands, and we want to get this right with regards to not just having snow dumped into areas that the Conservation Commission is not going to want. So we would ask that the board consider a condition of the comprehensive permit that a comprehensive snow management plan be issued and reviewed prior to occupancy, and that will be the culmination of our trip to the Conservation Commission and to get all of their information and their input on it. It will incorporate what Princeton normally does with regard to snow management. They engage their residents. They have an email process in which they contact their residents to move cars, to station cars, and to put snow where they need to, and then they get the residents to move the cars back. That happens on all of their sites during all of the storms. Notwithstanding that, we know that there may come a time that we run out of room for snow because of the areas that we know we won't be able to put snow. So we commit that to trucking it off site, and we would work with the board to include that into into that condition, and so that it ultimately gets into the snow management plan. And whether that's a certain amount of snow, it's tough to say. I think it's basically when snow gets in the way of parking, we're at the point where we need to truck it off site. But and we'll do that because that's not going to be pleasant for our residents if they don't have places to park. But again, the condition will codify that. Additionally, we're amenable to that condition, also including the restriction of sodium-based de-icing products, which we know will probably be something the Conservation Commission imposes, but happy to get it all into your decision as well. That was 7 and 8 both had to do with snow. The next one, the next series of comments has to do with stormwater, and a lot of this is overcome by the porous pavement, the switch to porous pavement. So I won't belabor them. Just safe to say that that the issues would also be resolved by that. There is a call from BSC to provide a pipe capacity analysis and some additional detail. We believe that to be ripe for a condition to be included in the post comprehensive permit final plan package that we've been talking about.
But you know what, this might be a good time for me to just chime in, if I could. We're talking about a number of conditions that we would like to see, at least as a skeletal decision. If I could impose upon town council, is Jonathan here? Jonathan available?
I'm here.
Hi, Jonathan. I know you've probably been paying attention. If you can keep track of these, what I think may be helpful is if, on behalf of the town, you can maybe construct, along with the applicant, some type of proposed decision with these conditions that the board can look at, question, maybe add some to it, maybe rework it, but at least some type of a working document that we can look at in front of us, where we have all these conditions listed so we know what we're seeing. Is that something that can be done?
Yes, certainly. And I would also probably include some standard conditions that I would recommend from other comprehensive permit decisions I've worked on, and maybe some placeholders if questions arise as we're working on the draft that need the board's attention.
Yeah, just kind of a working document that we can look at, because there's a lot of information here, and I think that at some point we should be presented with a skeletal document which has these conditions listed. If a member of the board wishes to tweak it, add one, talk about adding one, that's fine. But I think we need to kind of coalesce all of this information into some type of skeletal working document.
Absolutely.
Right, does that sound like a reasonable way to move forward, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, that's quite typical.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Tom Syracuse. I think that's an excellent approach, by the way, to get that working document, and we can work off that to, improve and discuss through it. I think that's an excellent idea, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we're happy to work with Jonathan on that. We've given the Word documents. A lot of this we do say condition that we would like this condition and that condition. A lot of it gets kind of brought down into with regards to the final plans and supporting documentation, kind of a single comprehensive, quite lengthy condition that talks about the expectations of the town, what is with regard to what is included in that, and what it addresses, and also the internal process for all of that information to be technically reviewed, so that everyone knows that, okay, it not only has been addressed and that information is provided, but most importantly, that it's all leaving the project in compliance with the comprehensive permit. It doesn't start to drive the comprehensive permit in a different direction. So it's quite typical, quite normal.
I didn't mean to slow your roll, but as we're going through all of these these line items to talk about conditions of a permit, might as well get them all in our ducks in a row in a document to work on.
No, actually, Mr. Chairman, I was just about done. The balance again of BSC's comments have to do with that additional information, or that more technical information, and also some items and questions that are overcome by the implementation of the porous pavement. So that's it. I know that your consultant from BSC is here, and I'm happy to answer any questions the board or public may have.
Thank you, Mr. Pesnola. All right, Andrew, how do you want to proceed from here?
I think, Mr. Chairman, your peer review consultant from BSC is here. I think we should probably give them an opportunity to make sure that they concur with all the things you've heard from Joe. And then the last segment that we will talk about is traffic, and then some wrap-up comments, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Before, and I think that's an appropriate way to proceed, I would just like to say on the outset, I would like to hear from the BSC consultant what he deems to be the major issues here that remain, and the level of comfort that they have that they're going to be addressed.
Sure. So this is Marissa Valentine.
I'm sorry, Marissa. I referred to you as he. I apologize for that.
No problem.
So what do you give us your comments on what Mr. Pesnola just went through, and let us know what you think of the the big picture items here.
Sure. So they did address most of the comments with the proposed pervious pavement design. I will say that the design that they have submitted is a sketch plan, so we haven't been able to review the areas and an updated stormwater management report to make sure it meets all of the guidelines. But based on the sketch, it probably will, but we can't confirm that it meets all of the regulations. I'd say the two big outstanding items are the groundwater elevations and the pipe sizing. We did notice that specifically in the area of PUIS number 4, there's some varying elevations that could affect the grading and the site layout for that area. So we did recommend some additional test pits, and the same thing with pipe sizing.
Joe?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just quickly, both those items are overcome with the implementation of porous pavement. The beauty of porous pavement is there aren't as many pipes, if any. And we've got a smaller cross section, so water table offset becomes less challenging. So, but again, it's quite common, typical for that level of detail, updated stormwater or detailed stormwater calculations and so forth to all be submitted with the final plans for another round of review and thumbs up that everything works and everything is fully compliant. Additionally, we won't be able to rest on preliminary plans with regards to our filings with Conservation Commission. So, our sequencing is to finish up with you, to go to Conservation, in which we will have to elevate the amount of information and support the porous pavement approach. And that'll get us right and ready to be able to submit through the building department those final plans for confirmation that your conditions have been complied with.
Great, thanks, Joe. Mr. Chairman, do we want to pause after that second section and see if the members have any other commentary?
Sure. Anyone else have any
just have one
comments or
question
questions on what we just went over?
I have a question on the conservation part. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Ray.
Yep, on the conservation part. If that conservation was to be appealed, the decision from the board the other night, how would that line be impacted? In other words, by the appeal, you would have to wait for the decision, what the real line would be. And how would that make an impact as timetable in a decision on how you go about on this plot plan of the units?
Mr. Lepore, it's Andrew from Princeton. Let me see if I can jump in and answer Mr. Lepore's question. To the extent that anything gets appealed, we will deal with that in due course. Princeton is committed to moving the process forward in the timeline that we have promised to the town. If there's an appeal, we'll have to deal with that in due course. For everyone's understanding, what Mr. Lepore is referring to is that the abbreviated notice of resource area delineation was approved by the Conservation Commission last Wednesday evening. And so, if it were to be appealed, we will have to deal with it in due course, but we are completely committed, Mr. Lepore, to moving forward.
Okay. Mr. Chair?
Sure, Jonathan.
So just briefly, I think, Ray, your question might be, would an appeal prevent the applicant from filing a notice of intent and seeking an order of conditions? And in my opinion, they would not. They could file with the Conservation Commission and ask for an order of conditions. Obviously, they'd be doing that at risk, and they would be facing the potential for things being changed by DEP. But bear in mind that DEP has to issue a decision within 70 days if they're going to issue a superseding order of resource area delineation. So, it's not likely to be dragged out too far.
Okay, I was just wondering, just say the appeal did say for any reason won, then will that affect the project? In other words, would that line that we're talking to on the river, would that impact any locations of the two structures? I guess that's my real question.
Well, I think the answer is probably yes. I'll let Mr. Chapin and his team answer that question. But obviously, if it did impact the plan that you're approving, they would have to come back with a request to modify the comprehensive permit, and there's a process for the board to determine whether it's a substantial change or an insubstantial change. But if they're talking about moving buildings and dramatically changing the stormwater functions on the site, then probably the board would find it's a substantial change and hold a new public hearing to review what the changes are.
Okay, I mean, I'm just, I don't know, I'm just going by what I've seen at the previous, some of the previous meetings. And that was my only concern, because I know we're going through the process. However, if something was to trigger everything that we're looking at, then I was just wondering how that would be set back to re-coordinate to get back on track. I guess that's where I'm coming in from.
Yeah. So again, the Board of Appeals, fortunately for you, you don't have to deal with the wetlands piece because there's no particular local bylaw issues that you have to concern yourself with. And so it's really all going to be a matter of the order of conditions issued by the commission. As with anything else you approve, if the plan changes for any reason, whether it's for wetlands or something else, there's going to be a process that you can follow to consider those changes. But I don't think you have to worry about it right now.
Isn't this a Conservation Commission issue?
Yes, Mr.
That's right.
Chairman.
Yep.
Okay, I mean, I guess anybody can appeal anything, but if it's not something that we're dealing with, I don't know, how it affects us tonight, how we proceed tonight. If the Conservation Commission, if a decision that they make is appealed, That doesn't have anything to do with us. So Jonathan, am I wrong on that, or?
No, that's right. That's what, that's why I was saying that that's really an issue for the Conservation Commission. If they issue the order of conditions, obviously, any approval at the local level can be appealed. But whenever there are multiple approvals from multiple boards required, if every board waited for every appeal period to lapse for every other board, then nothing would ever get accomplished.
I mean, if something happens beyond our control that renders the comp permit, invalid or moot, I mean, I guess we can't control that. We can't really anticipate it nor control it. Am I wrong?
Nope, that's right.
You're correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any other questions before we move on? Okay, Andrew, what's next?
I think the last presentation for this evening, Mr. Chairman, would be traffic, and that's Jeff Dirk from Vanessa & Associates. You've heard from Jeff. You've also heard from Green, who's your peer review consultant. Jeff can go through where they stand, and if there's somebody from Green here this evening, they can chime in, but why don't we turn it over to Jeff Dirk?
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Andrew, and good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As Andrew had mentioned, for the record, Jeffrey Dirk, with partner with Vanessa & Associates. So the chairman had mentioned you received a letter this afternoon from Green, and fortunately, it's a relatively short letter. With respect to the traffic study itself, we've addressed all of Green's comments in terms of the additional analysis that they had asked for, and just very briefly to summarize kind of what they had asked and have since reviewed and confirmed. They asked to provide a comparison of the traffic volumes that we expect would be associated with this project to the existing uses that are going to be removed to accommodate primarily Building A or exclusively Building A. So there's the commercial buildings that front along Middlesex Avenue. So we did provide that information to them, and it's consistent with what we had presented to you previously, which is that the traffic volumes are really comparable. This project will result in a slight increase in traffic, primarily during the morning peak hour, because those uses that are there today aren't really active to a great extent during the morning. So we were showing about a 24 vehicle trip in the morning peak hour. So it's not a significant increase. The other thing that they'd asked us to look at is the more traditional traffic analysis. And I know that was one of the things that we had spoken about with the board members about providing the typical capacity analysis, looking at delays in vehicle queuing at intersections. So we did perform that analysis, and the two locations they'd asked us to look at and that the board had also commented on were the Middlesex High Street intersection, so the signalized intersection there, and then the Jefferson intersection with Middlesex and the exit from the country store that's opposite that intersection. So Valerie and the town actually provided us traffic volume data. So it's pre-COVID traffic volumes that we're looking at. So it's not influenced by what's going on out there today and the changes in volume and traffic patterns. And we also included the rehabilitation facility in that traffic analysis. So it's a standard formal traffic analysis of the impacts of this project. And the conclusion that we came to and that Green validated was that the additional traffic from this project, it didn't cause any degradation in those levels of service, so those A through F letter grades that were reported. As you all know, it is difficult, primarily during the evening peak hours, to exit from the country store or from Jefferson Road, and the analysis bears that out. So what we were showing, because the delays there were excessive, what we look at is what the increase in the queuing is. So if you're sitting in the parking lot of the country store trying to exit, and there's a backup and queue that's there, we show what the incremental increase from the project will be, basically looking at it before and after the project was constructed. And the conclusion was that delays would not go up by more than 2 seconds for any movement, and that the incremental increase in queuing was about 1 vehicle. So again, it wasn't a significant increase or impact at those locations we had looked at. And again, your consultant has confirmed those findings. So the last set of items that they'd asked us to look at deal with the access. There's also some comments relative to the site plan. And I think Joe has gone through how we've addressed all of those. And so there isn't anything really outstanding with respect to the comments that Green has raised, although they haven't seen Joe's response. So I think when they look at that, you'll see it kind of addresses the few items that were related to the site plan. But focusing on the access and the comments on the access, if you remember in the last hearing, there was a discussion about the southernmost driveway on Jefferson and how close it was to Middlesex. And we had suggested that because of that proximity, it should be one way in. However, your peer reviewer correctly pointed out the fact that that really creates a dead end situation within the parking lot. So if someone enters from Middlesex to building A, find a parking place, there's no way for them to kind of reverse direction or get back out onto Jefferson without going out onto Middlesex. So what they had suggested was that driveway be a right in, right out only driveway. And we agree with that recommendation, and Joe's implemented that as a part of the site plan. Their follow-up comment to that was that they were asking us, we were doing that restriction by way of signing, and they had asked that we look at doing something a little bit more robust, which would be dealing with either scored concrete pavement to create an island or pavement markings. So that's something that we can implement into the site plan as well. And the last comment relative to the access dealt with the sight lines. And Joe, I think, talked about sight lines in terms of the reduction of the wall or the elimination of the wall along Middlesex. So that has resulted in improvements in sight lines so that we won't have any obstructions within the site triangle areas. And then from the Middlesex Avenue driveway, if you're exiting the Building A driveway to Middlesex Avenue, you're looking towards High Street, your consultant had requested that we look at trimming some vegetation that overhangs into the right of way, and it actually sticks out into the sidewalk to some extent. So we agreed to do that subject to any rights or permits to the town. And that would give us the clear sight line that we need exiting from that driveway. So that was committed to. And the final set of comments, and this gets to the chairman's discussion with your council about conditions of approval. So your consultant had asked us to look at recommendations that would ultimately be put in probably as a part of your condition of approval of the project. And the two items relative to traffic, the first is, and this gets beyond kind of the sidewalk issues and everything that Joe had mentioned along Jefferson, at the intersection of Jefferson and Middlesex, the sidewalks and the wheelchair ramps and the crossings are not Americans with Disabilities Act compliant. So your consultant had asked that we commit to reconstructing those ramps and reconstructing the crosswalks that exist there to make sure that they're fully compliant. And so we've agreed to do that. At the Middlesex Avenue High Street intersection, and that location was the subject of a road safety audit that I believe the town paid for to be done at that location that identified a number of improvements that could be undertaken there to improve safety. We had originally in our response letter agreed to implement what was known as the short-term low-cost improvements. But as you look at your peer reviewer's most recent letter, they've indicated that the town has in fact received grant monies to actually implement those improvements at that intersection. So those are already fully funded. There were some additional improvements that were not funded as a part of that grant. And those included basically changing out all of the bulbs at all of the signal heads at the intersection to make sure that they're very high visibility, LED type indications, which are much less costly to maintain. They use less energy, as you probably know, but they're also much brighter. And so that's a safety improvement that they've asked us to implement because that was not covered as a part of the town's cost. The other part of the improvement they asked us to do there is around each of the signal heads have what's known as a back plate. So it's basically a frame that goes around the signal head so that they stand out. It's basically a black background that's there. A safety related improvement to make sure that the signal indications, not only are they visible by replacing the bulbs, but the added enhancement is that around the edge of that back plate, so the frame around the signal heads, is that you put reflective tape, and you've probably seen those throughout the town, so that your vision is drawn to those. They do reflect any headlights during low light conditions as well. So they've asked that we implement that improvement as well. So we've agreed to do that as a part of the project. And then the very last comment in their comment letter was they had asked that we, as a part of our transportation demand management program, which is encouraging people to use public transportation, primarily the MBTA communal services there. They've asked us to commit that for each of the new tenants of the building, upon initial occupancy, that we commit to subsidizing a transit pass for them. And the applicant has agreed to do that. So basically it's paying for the MBTA commuter rail pass for all new residents during the initial lease up of the building for a 90-day period. So for 3 months, the applicant has agreed to fund the cost of the MBTA transit pass for new residents of the project. So that's it. There's nothing outstanding relative to the traffic study or our commitments to mitigation that they've asked. And so you'll see that in the letter. And again, I believe that all of the comments related to the site plans, Mr. Pesnola has addressed as a part of his other responses, but Green did not have the benefit of those responses when they issued this letter. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Let me ask first, before we get to the board, is Corinne available? Corinne, you with us?
Yes, I'm here tonight. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I just wanted to at least run this by you. Are you satisfied with the way the applicant has addressed all the concerns that you've raised?
Yes. So, you know, as Jeffrey stated, they have provided the traffic information that we did request regarding the analysis for those locations. There were some existing safety issues out there today, so we did ask for some of that additional high visibility mitigation for the intersection, which they responded to. I'll say, you know, regarding the site plan, we did still have a few outstanding comments. We'd still like to see the site triangles on the site plan at some point, just to kind of confirm that that those areas will be clear and where they're located, and that there's, you know, no visible obstructions in the vicinity, and also some clarification on whether the pedestrian connection is going to be provided from Middlesex Avenue north of Building A into the site.
When do you anticipate that your remaining issues, if I could call them that, will have been addressed? Because I guess I'm wondering whether you could supplement your letter with whatever final recommendations you have and whether they've been addressed appropriately.
Mr. Chairman, just to jump in, we can get Corinne the site plan with the site triangles. It makes the most sense to put that on the landscape plan. Okay. As Jeffrey said, another benefit of the lowering of the grades is, and the elimination of the wall, is improved sight distance, so that we're confident that Corinne will find that that's right. And with regard to the connection, pedestrian connection from Middlesex directly to the front door of Building A, we had prior had determined that was infeasible because of ADA compliance, because of the grades. We'll take another look at that real quick, and we could provide Corinne a sketch. Hopefully we can implement that pedestrian connection ADA compliant, because we can't provide the connection if it's not ADA. So our initial solution to that was to have everyone stay on the sidewalk on Middlesex until they got to Jefferson and come in that way. But obviously, as Corinne noted, it makes more sense to get them directly to the front door. So we'll look at that, get those two sketches out to Corinne, and hopefully she can get back to the board in short order that everything's right and ready.
That would be great. Are there any other board members that have any questions regarding the traffic at this point?
I have.
All right, one at a time. Who wants to go first?
I have a question regarding the traffic. A couple of questions, actually. The first question has to do with the past, the 90 days. Is that per household? Is that per person within that, that unit, or how does that work?
So it's typical that it's one per unit. But if Andrew wants to expand upon that, he certainly can. But the typical condition is that it's limited to one pass per unit.
Okay. And then the second question is, I'm sorry if I missed it, but I have to ask it. Regarding once the train goes through and there's a stoppage of traffic, Was that a consideration at a rush hour as to the amount of hold up between the traffic coming in and out of the facility as well as the traffic going through Middlesex? Was that considered in the traffic study?
You know, it's typically not something that's considered from the standpoint of the traffic study, because at that moment, at least when the gates are down and all traffic is stopped, no one goes anywhere. So it's basically, it's, you know, would be a failing condition. We typically don't analyze that because it's a momentary thing. I mean, it does take a little bit of time for the traffic to flow through after that. But it's really limited to just the time period that the train's there. And then it really recovers probably within a few minutes after the train is left and the gates go back open. But when the gates are down, no traffic's going to move, you know, because the Jefferson is going to be essentially blocked at that time by the queue waiting for the gates to go back up.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Tom, before we go to Jackie?
No, all set, thank you.
You got it, Jackie?
Can you tell I was getting ready?
Yeah, I got it. Go ahead, fire away.
So with all due respect, I still think that it's been minimized on the traffic, especially just what you said with the train, when the train arms are down. So just picture it. You said just a few minutes that the traffic will disperse. But if you got people coming out of Eli's, people coming out of Jefferson, not everybody's going to stop to let you go when the arms are back up. So I still think that's a problematic area. And you mentioned that for the companies, the stores that are there right now, I still feel that there's a lot less traffic and people going to those stores than you have 50 residents in that building alone behind it. Well, where you're gonna put that building A, I think you're minimizing the traffic a little bit. That's just my comment.
You know, they're based on projections, so I guess that's part of it. So not discounting at all what you've said, but from the standpoint of how we analyze the impacts of the project, we did not remove traffic associated with those buildings. So basically, when we did our analysis, and so not to minimize, we didn't do our analysis based on 24 additional trips during the morning and 5 trips during the evening. We absolutely didn't do that. What we essentially, our analysis assumes, for worst case scenario, those businesses stay in place, and whatever traffic is associated with them, we didn't subtract it, and we just loaded the new traffic from our project on top of it. So it's almost it's a worst case unrealistic scenario from the standpoint of we did not account for the fact that those buildings will be removed in the traffic analysis, basically because of the reasons you just said. We didn't want to create something where we're creating what might be an unrealistic scenario. So right now, what you've got is a condition. The analysis reflects a condition of you build the apartments and all of the commercial space that exists there today stays there. So the only reason we did this comparative analysis was just to, you know, really show trip projection for the project versus a trip estimate for those commercial buildings and comparing what it would look like with those removed. But our traffic analysis and the findings is based on apartments and those buildings still staying in place.
So I wonder, because it's going to be so congested, have you thought, or has there been any discussion of considering putting some type of light somewhere? I don't even know where you would put it, but it's going to be a problem getting in and out of that whole area, especially with the train arms down and a train goes by.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that situation happens today. It would happen with, the situation is going to continue to happen, you know, irrespective of what gets developed on this site. And it's not uncommon where you have a train crossing and particularly a station where the station is located close to the intersection, so the train doesn't fully get past kind of where the road is. So it's not, you know, it's common when you've got this type of situation. putting a traffic, first of all, you could not put a traffic signal at Jefferson Road, and that's where you would put it if it met the criteria, and it doesn't. The real solution is to have a station such that the train wouldn't have to stop close enough to Middlesex to block the traffic. I mean, that's or some type of grade separation. And, so that's really the solution. Installing a traffic signal is not a solution. What I would say is that, and you know this, because I know you're very familiar with the area, the queuing along Jefferson Road, outside of the train being there, it's not a large distance. So it's somewhere between 3 or 4 vehicles, even with the project in place. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, the largest queue is actually in the parking lot or trying to exit from Country Store. It's very successful, and it has a lot of patronage. And so really what we're showing is the significant impact is really on the Country Store when the train goes down, because it has such a large customer base, and it's not really the Jefferson Road approach. But you're 100% right. It's like when you're waiting for that gate to come back up, if you're on Middlesex, you're not really thinking about letting people out of any of those streets unless you're really feeling good, or there's a long line at the registry, so you don't care. So you got to wait for that traffic to clear through. You're 100% right. That's the way it functions today. It will continue to do so in the future. And the primary approach of the queuing is really in the Country Store parking lot.
Is there any possibility of where the and I know you don't have really any control, but I don't know, I'm just going to throw it out there. So where the landing for the train, where you get the train, where people stand, is there any way to, if that actually was pushed down a little bit farther, then the train could actually be further over, and then it wouldn't actually, sometimes the train is actually stopped in the middle of the road.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, can I address that point? Because as you probably know, the Board of Selectmen have been dealing with this as a focal point for quite some time with the MBTA and the operators of the train system. It's $180,000 that the legislative delegation was able to get earmarked for addressing that area, the train station. And part of the plan is to move the station up the tracks, if you will, so it's closer to the building that currently houses the credit union, because one of our particular issues was getting the train so that it's off the road when it stops. So there is going to be work to do that. I think the target start date is the latter part of 2020. But that is going to be addressed through our efforts working with the T.
Oh, that's nice to know.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would be a significant benefit, not only just for the flow of traffic, but also emergency access to the whole area.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Jackie?
No.
Any other member of the board wish to be heard on the traffic issue? No? Okay, Andrew, let me ask you this. Is that going to conclude your presentation for this evening?
Mr. Chairman, it is. We have a couple of wrap-up comments just to let you know that the light fixture that was requested by town staff has been turned in and looked at by town staff, and they found it acceptable. The fire flow test was done, and no fire pump will be needed. That was witnessed by town staff. And then the very last item to talk about is the sewer peer review. We've agreed with the town engineer, Department of Public Works, to move the sewer peer review to be a condition of dealing with MassWorks. And so after the comprehensive permit, but before the MassWorks application is in, we will fund a peer review to be done under the auspices of Mr. Woods and the town engineer to make sure that the sewer capacity issue and the pump station issue has been looked at before the applications turned into MassWorks.
Okay.
With those items on the record, Mr. Chairman, we are done with our presentation.
For this evening, or done for done?
We are done, and I believe that, unless there's additional questions or responses, the list that Mr. Silverstein and Mr. Brown will put together of those conditions can be considered hopefully by the board at its next meeting.
Okay, so you've presented all of the factual information to the board. Now it's just a matter of the board deliberating and then amongst ourselves, perhaps reviewing any potential conditions, adding some, tweaking it. But you, as far as a factual presentation, you've completed.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I've held the public hearing open. I haven't closed it. Interestingly enough, I don't think we've had any participants in any of these hearings so far. I will open it up again, and I'll wait for a period of time if anyone wishes to call in to opine on this. But other than the board deliberating amongst itself, and then perhaps going back and forth with the applicant, I'm inclined to close the public hearing tonight. I will say that late this afternoon, or at least I got it late this afternoon, we did get a letter from Ms. Suzanne Sullivan from the Headwaters Stream Team. It's dated today. She rather than commenting at this type of a meeting, she said that she'd prefer to submit a letter, which I will make part of the record. I'm not gonna read the whole thing into the record, but suffice to say, what she raised was already discussed earlier tonight through Mr. Lepore's questions regarding the Conservation Commission and their their order of resource area delineation. So I don't think it's anything substantive that we can control or discuss, but I will submit the letter as part of the record. And other than that, Mr. O'Neill, I'll open it up to anyone that it's on the line or in queue that wishes to comment on this. Is there anybody?
There's not. Like you said, if we can wait maybe a minute, just to see if anyone calls in.
Oh yeah, I'll wait. I mean, I got to be quite honest with you. I understand the limitations of this particular forum. Believe me, I understand it. But I'm a little surprised that we've had, 3 meetings on this, and no one has chosen to comment. I mean, I'm not making any type of a call on that. I'm just saying I'm a bit surprised. But we'll hold it open for a couple minutes. If anybody is out there and wishes to be heard. May be a record for a 40B application that's gone through multiple hearings and not having one member of the public comment, but it is what it is. We're available.
We advertise this meeting on social media as well, not the 30B in particular, but the meeting itself.
Yeah, I mean, I've held the hearing open. It's out there, so I'll wait about another 30 seconds. Mr. O'Neill, and then let me know when that time period is elapsed, and I'll close the public hearing.
Will do. That's 30 seconds, Mr. Chair. No callers.
Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the public hearing on this application. What I will then do is, if the board wishes to deliberate any further this evening, we can do so. Or if there's any further questions of the applicant, I think we've kind of gone and done them as we went. But obviously, if there's anybody that has any additional questions, let me know now. If not, we're going to have another chance to chew this all over at the next meeting. And hopefully, Jonathan, between you and the applicant, you can maybe put together some type of a framework for a list of conditions that we can go over. I believe that the board may find that helpful. So, but without any further ado, does any other member of the board have any questions or comments at this time?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. So I guess this is really kind of directed towards Valerie. If she could, we've reviewed this and gone over all this information over the past month or 2 months. It's a little overwhelming. I think the planning board, the conservation, everything that you've been a part of with the town, the selectmen, some of the items that I had some questions on, not so much for the applicant, but more for you and the planning board to make sure that you guys are okay with. The porous pavement thing is a little tricky for me because I understand the pitfalls of porous pavement. You can't sand it. It needs to be salted only. There's a lot of maintenance involved with it. I don't understand exactly why it was introduced, but maybe if you could just give maybe an overall where the town stands on this, from your seat, where you're much more involved in this and the development of the project.
Sure, and I was actually just going to suggest, Mr. Chairman, before you vote on closing the hearing, I think it could be really helpful, since we got the plans and the revised materials today, to have some time to look at those as a staff and talk about those, to see, to kind of go over them, to see what we see, because we just saw those documents today, including the documents on the porous pavement. So a little bit of time to go over those. Maybe I think it might be a good idea to have a Zoom meeting with the applicant's team, just to go over, all of the comments that are still out there, and make sure that we are giving you guys the most complete set of plans that that can be done at this point, and then those list of conditions can be kind of developed and for the next time, and you can maybe keep the hearing open until next time, and consider revisions, minor revisions, like was suggested with the traffic.
Let me ask you something, Valerie.
Sure.
Are you suggesting that we schedule another meeting in addition to the ones that we've already scheduled?
I thought you were planning on having a second meeting in July.
Yeah, we are. We're having them every 2 weeks moving forward.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm suggesting is just to keep the hearing open till the next meeting in July, so that you could consider additional materials that might come out of a meeting with town staff and the applicant, just to go over. I think there was some misunderstanding with some of our comments in looking at the responses that we got today. So just clearing up those misunderstandings.
Well, let me ask you, just so I know, what are some of the misgivings or misapprehensions that you've seen that you're concerned with? General nature.
So I think one of the things was the emergency egress from the garage that the fire chief had requested. I think we're thinking of the wrong spot. We're actually requesting that to be on the I guess the north side of the garage, where it dead ends, having a walkout egress for pedestrians at that point. The fire chief was concerned that if there's a car fire in the garage and someone's kind of stuck and can't get past that car fire, having an exit, just a walkout pedestrian exit at that end, would be really the safest way to do it. And having the standpipe at that end of the garage where they have it, I think there was a misunderstanding. They have it at the other end of the garage. So just sort of talking through things like that were just misunderstood.
So you think that there are still some factual, substantive issues that have not been satisfactorily resolved that would mitigate that we keep the public hearing open?
Yeah, and I think that it would reduce the amount of conditions that maybe need to be written.
Okay. I mean, I have no problem with that. I mean, so what I would probably then say is that I would request maybe from you for the next meeting, perhaps a list of what you believe is still amorphous or hasn't been addressed specifically to your satisfaction, so we can discuss it and then get that out at the next meeting. That would be helpful, because I want to get to a point where the board has all the information, the town is comfortable with their peer reviews and how they've been addressed, and then the board just makes a decision.
Right.
But if there's still some factual ambiguities out there, then yeah, I have no problem with keeping the public hearing open till the next meeting. But I do think that the board needs some guidance as to what those issues, what those unresolved issues are and how they can be addressed by the next meeting.
Yeah, and the hope would be that we could meet with the applicant team to go over all of the comments so that we can just iron it out, and that we're coming back at the next meeting with those questions completely answered.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. So then I will not close the public hearing, but I will say that I anticipate doing so at the next meeting. So if there's somebody out there that wishes to opine or be heard on this, I would suggest that they be ready at the next meeting, because I do anticipate closing the public hearing at the next meeting. And if someone submits something in writing, I will make it a part of the record, but I don't think it's appropriate that I read it into the record, because it gives a bit of I guess it makes it seem a little bit more, gives it legitimacy if it comes from the chairman. If somebody has something to say, they should come and say it. But if they prefer to make a written submission, it will be part of the record. But I'm not going to be sitting here reading letters. We got into that issue with the detox, and I don't want that to happen here. So if somebody wishes to be heard, they can call in next time, or if they want to submit something in writing, I will make sure that it's part of the record, and I will refer to it during public comments. But I'm not going to read it verbatim. That's not my job. So okay. Any other members of the board have anything further before we take a motion to adjourn?
Yes, actually, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to make sure that can we have the material far enough in advance so that we can review it, so we can be more prepared than like hours before the meeting? I hope.
Ms. Santini, we will do everything we can to get the materials in as quickly as we can, but we turned around all of our comments. The letters were dated Monday, and we turned them around and got them back in 48 hours. So I know everyone's trying hard. It's July 4th weekend. There's an awful lot going on. Valerie is wearing, I think, 18 hats last time I counted. So we're trying to, I think everyone's doing everything they can to get it in. We will try and get it in, because I think the next meeting, to Mr. Syracuse's point about having the list, we want to make sure we get that to you guys in advance so that it can be read and digested, so that it's ready to be debated and acted upon at the next meeting.
Yes, I can.
And I do think that we had, with the exception of whatever update that Ms. Gingrich is going to be providing, I think we have everything now. So we do have some time to review it prior to the next meeting. Correct, Andrew?
You have everything of substance, Mr. Chairman, that's there. There may be some nits, as Valerie said, and some changes, but the substance of everything that you need is in your hands.
Okay, so at the next meeting, I anticipate getting something from the planning director indicating what other outstanding issues or questions regarding potential outstanding issues are there, how they have been addressed. I hope to have a working draft of a decision with conditions that the board can review, and we can discuss and kick that around and add to it and delete it and do whatever we're going to do with it at the next meeting. Is that fair, Jonathan? You got Jonathan there?
Sorry. Yeah, I was muted. Yes, that's a fair statement, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. So then I guess
I have one question. I'm sorry to interrupt on the conditions. Is it possible on each condition you can add in a timeline for closure of that condition?
Yeah, so typically what the way I prepare these decisions is there will be certain conditions, a number were discussed tonight, that are going to be, prior to issuance of any building permit. So things like submission of final plans and final drainage analyses, things like that. There will be certain conditions that will be sort of construction phase conditions, whether it's hours of work or, dust control or things like that. And then there will be certain conditions that are post-occupancy conditions. So those are all going to be spelled out about in terms of when certain conditions need to be met. And some are going to be just ongoing conditions.
What's the definition of an ongoing condition? In perpetuity?
Exactly.
Doesn't it have an end game to it?
Well, just as an example, Tony mentioned maintenance of pervious pavement. So obviously, pervious pavement works really well as long as it's, treated correctly and properly maintained. And, smarter people than me will want to review the maintenance protocols and make sure that those are complied with on an ongoing basis, so it doesn't get all clogged up with sand, so that you have, the purpose of the pervious pavement being defeated. So that's never going to go away. You're going to want that to be an ongoing condition. You're going to want landscaping to be maintained in perpetuity. So if something dies, it gets replaced. So those sorts of things is what I'm referring to as ongoing conditions.
Well, I'm referring to conditions that have to do with, for instance, something that's supposed to be met prior to the permit given that can't get there right now, but will be allowed or will be permitted at a certain time where the conditions will eventually go away. I'm not talking about maintenance issues. I'm talking about, subject to, whatever condition that they can't get to, which is a requirement, that will eventually have to go away, other than it's a condition. Well, when you plan to complete that condition, so that the permit is as clean as possible.
Well, again, so, if we're talking about something, for instance, like submission of a definitive subdivision plan,
right,
as opposed to right now, what's before you is preliminary.
Right.
That is going to be a condition that has to be met prior to issuance of any building permit. I mean, truth be told, they're going to need it much earlier than that.
Can we get a date?
Well, usually we don't put a date in town because there's so many other variables. We have to wait to hear back on the MassWorks grant. We have to wait to hear back if there is an appeal in terms of the resource area delineation or the order of conditions, or the comprehensive permit for that matter. So usually you don't do it by date, you do it by what they need, what they're going to need. They're gonna need building permits before they start this project. And so, we don't really care if they get the definitive subdivision plan in by September 31st, September 30th, sorry, or by December 31st, or by some other date. We just care that they get it done prior to getting a building permit, because if they never get a building permit, then the fact that they don't have a definitive subdivision plan endorsed doesn't really matter. So usually you don't do it by dates, because those dates can be subject to change based on variables that are outside of everyone's control, including the applicant and the board.
I definitely would understand that. I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm saying what I'm getting at is, a planning board hasn't, let's say, done an approval on this, and it's a condition of planning board approval, or it's a condition of something that needs to be met. To me, I don't like conditions. I never like them. I know we have to have them, but they should be limited. So, I'm hoping we're not going to get like this 50-page condition list that we have to approve against. I'm hoping that can get down to some, minimal level, which is acceptable. That's all I'm saying. And if there are conditions there, and we can get a closure date on it, we should look to that. That's just my opinion.
I get it. I will say that comprehensive permits are a little bit of a different animal, and they do typically have
a lot of conditions.
you know, and I'll tell you why, Tom, because the unlike when you get a variance or special permit application where you would expect, you know, pretty close to final building plans or final site plans, the way that the comprehensive permit statute and regulations are laid out is that they only want you to provide, they only want the applicant to provide very preliminary and conceptual plans, because there's so many steps that come after the ZBA issues its comprehensive permit. And so by nature then, since you're getting much more preliminary plans, you want to have comfort that what is being represented to you is actually going to happen. And so I get your, you know, preference for not wanting lengthy condition lists, but that's just sort of, unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast when it comes to comprehensive permits, because you want to make sure that you're protected and that you're including everything that is going to be a requirement down the road.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I neglected, I'll read it into the record now. I neglected to talk about the planning board's recommendation, even though this is an ongoing matter. It did say that the planning board at its July 7th, 2020 meeting recommends that the Board of Appeals request and review signage and mailbox locations for the site. The board also recommends that the Board of Appeals encourage low impact development components and the use of renewable resources. The board reserves additional comment until the plans are revised to address review comments, and will revisit the recommendation at their August 4th meeting for what it's worth. That's what they've mentioned. So the applicant might want to be prepared to address that as well. Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one last question? We talked about the design, and I know I don't know what number it was, 15, 14, whichever it was, about the vertical, horizontal sketch. Can we get a picture of that or some design actually, so we could see what you're talking about visually in a sketch, as opposed to written?
We can. We'll be more than happy to have the architect turn that into you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Anybody else, or is there going to be a motion to adjourn? Oh, by the way, Jackie, why don't you just mention for everyone's edification the next meeting time and day? Kelly. Sorry, Kelly. What's the next meeting date, Kelly, and the time?
You may be muted, Mr. Chairman. It's July 22 at 7 p.m.
Yeah, can you unmute yourself, Kelly? There you go.
Yeah, John just did. So it's July 22nd.
Okay, everyone, the next meeting is going to be July 22nd, at which time I anticipate closing the public hearing, and we'll see you all then. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Siracusa. Ms. Santini?
Yes.
I, myself, Mr. Siracusa?
Yes.
Mr. Barletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Lepore? Looks like Mr. Lepore is already adjourned. Okay, yeah, I don't see him. I don't see him on here, but anyway, I think we have a majority. We have a majority of a quorum present, so the meeting will be adjourned. We'll see you at the next meeting, folks. Have a good night.
You too.